last minute, any questions? I know it seems like you're pretty ready to go. So,
I mean, I could come up with lots of random questions completely unrelated to what we're talking about.
Good luck.
Hello, everybody. My name is Lat Mackey, and this is Sequence Break, a podcast that features conversations with speedrunners, TASers, developers, retro enthusiasts, and everything in between. This is episode 57, and I am extremely excited to be joined by the one, the only fcoughlin. Fred Coughlin, how are you doing? Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. It's a real treat to get to be here.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to describe your resume. And besides obviously being a speedrunner, I think perhaps most notably and a huge contribution to our wonderful speedrunning community, you are the creator of the Z1, Zelda 1 randomizer and SMB3 randomizer. I'm sure there are many other things too. Is that about right? Is some other things that might describe you as part of the community?
Probably two of the ones I'm most known for there, at least in terms of the dev side. I play randomizers, I've done speed runs, all that stuff. But I feel like, the randomizer communities, those are definitely two of the bigger areas that I've been involved with here going out.
I got to tell you, I've probably been a little bit more familiar with your avatar for longer than I've been familiar with you. It's such an iconic avatar that I always see in my, my Twitch panel on the side. I'm, Fred's streaming right now. Okay, this is awesome. And so have you had that avatar for as long as you've been streaming?
Pretty much. I mean, I started some of my speed runs with a couple of Mega Man ones, but I went into Zelda pretty quickly. That was a game I always played growing up, and so that one has always just been one's resonated with me. And the old man, I've kind of over time evolved into the old man, one of the old men among that community.
It's funny how quickly that changes.
Just a little bit.
Well, let's take it all back first, and I guess actually even before I go into my first question here. A couple of weeks ago, I do a show on GDQ where we look back at some of the moments in GDQ history, and we recently did one on Zelda 1, and Lack Attack and many others had kind of attributed part of the growth and the kind of explosion of Zelda 1 speedrunning in the mid 2010s to, among other things, the randomizer that you had created, but also I think obviously this great rivalry between Darkwing Duck and Lack Attack. There were just all these things that happened at once, and so I'm glad that it led me to you. It reminded me of that the randomizer was such an important part of the history as well. So,
well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, as I said, I actually saw that episode a couple of weeks ago there, and as I said, it was great going back and seeing that, because I remember back, mid 2010s there, that rivalry, watching Darkwing Duck back when, he was pushing those world records, and then that up-and-comer guy, Lack Attack, I think he had a number on his name at the time, just...
some digits.
Him coming along really strongly, and then there's the two of them trading back and forth, and that was a great time for watching those types of runs, and me aspiring at the time, like, okay, I want to get to be like that, or even maybe not quite that good, because I cannot make my fingers do the things that some other people are able to do on these things, but it definitely was one of those motivating factors to push me there.
I totally agree with you. And so speaking of that, let's take it even further back than that. When did you kind of get into gaming, start gaming? What are some your earliest memories of gaming for you?
Oh gosh, I can go back to Atari days, I'm pretty sure, in terms of that. I remember that one growing up. I mean, that wasn't necessarily a, speedrun level back then, but it was, just sitting at home, only kid at the time, before all of my sisters were born, and then many years later my brother, and just playing various games on there, the maze games, all that stuff. And then Nintendo came along, and I was like, oh gosh, this is so much better. And then, played that quite a bit, probably too much. My parents kept always wanting to stop me from playing, because they were like, oh gosh, you're playing too much, go outside and play a bit. But, those games, just loved playing them. Needed Game Genie codes back then, because, I wasn't always a, great player on a bunch of them, but played Zelda, played RPGs like Final Fantasy was a huge one for me growing up. The Mega Man games, I played a lot of those, and then went to Super Nintendo. Once again, got blown away by the giant jump on the level there, and hit a lot of the RPGs and stuff there going forward, pretty much.
Would you say that you spent the majority of your time in adventure, or at least, world building type games, as Zelda 1 and Final Fantasy and all those? I mean, or did you enjoy just the variety of it?
I played a had variety.
Okay.
Had Street Fighter, was never that great at it. I mean, could beat the game on the normal difficulty level. The Pilot Wings, the Star Fox type games. There were a bunch of them, but typically, if there was a game type I ended up in, it was a lot more the RPG ones. Final Fantasy VI. That one was one I absolutely 3, as I would know it back in the day. Loved that one. Seventh Saga. Dragon Warrior, whenever we rented that one from the store, which of course meant I got to about level 6 or 7, and then someone else rented the cart before I could rent it again the next weekend, and my file was gone, so I was back to the very beginning again. But it was pretty much just that over and over. Those types of games were always ones that really pulled me in, and even the games I didn't get until, I got to college and started, expanding my library and, finding ROMs and stuff and everything. That was the typical one I ended up going to, playing Final Fantasy, 4 as we now know it, playing Secret of Evermore, Secret of Mana, all those. Like, that type of style really was one that, pulled me in, really.
I'm kind of bummed that I didn't have Nintendo was the last console we got in my house, and actually TurboGrafx 16 and Nintendo were the ones. So I've only recently discovered later on in life Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, all these wonderful games that I got to tell you hold up remarkably well. I mean, the 16-bit generation just seems to hold up really, and the 8-bit to a certain extent, but these games just hold up so well. I think because they're some fundamentally strong as far as game level design and the interactivity with the player.
Agreed. And you felt like, too, like with a lot of the developers there in that era, they really got the idea of, okay, there's got to be some story. It's not just, they put some story into it. Because I remember my dad saying, gosh, I'm not going to sit through a movie playing some of these games. But it's like, there's story there, things you get attached to the characters. But also they had a lot of really cool mechanics. You look at the Final Fantasies where each of the characters had completely different skill sets. Final Fantasy IV, Kain jumping, Cecil the paladin protecting others. You've got your mages, you had, pretty much everyone out there, your ninja, which of course everyone loves ninjas. So you had your Ninja Edge doing all the stealing and stuff, and then expanding on that, FF6. Chrono Trigger then had those devs who had grown up essentially on that type of thing and even took that a step further. Combo attacks, 13 different endings or something like that built into the game. They really encapsulated that, and I mean they were in the nice portion where you could have good graphics on some of the animations, but it wasn't like it was a blow you out of the water with the graphics necessarily. You still had to have a story in there. You still had to have good gameplay mechanics to really pull it in. And as you said, that era, everyone seemed to fire on all cylinders.
They really did, and they understood, the developers of that time period really understood that, and I think that's definitely a big reason these games hold up so well nowadays. I'm curious, as somebody who I know we're going to get into the randomizer stuff. Can you remember what might have inspired you, or when you started tinkering with games, or thinking about how the game perhaps works or is made? Like, when did you start getting into that kind of thing?
I mean, I didn't do it necessarily the ROM hacking directly, but like I was like the idea of programming stuff and going into high school. One of the classes that electives I was able to take my senior year was a programming class on intro to C++, because of course that was the one at the time. I'd done a little bit of QBasic stuff on my dad's old DOS computer back before then, and like the concepts behind it. And by it was a second semester class, but we had to buy at my school the books at the start of the year. By the time the second semester class had started, I'd pretty much read through the whole book, downloaded a C++ compiler, had started trying to build my own things. And so I almost ended up being kind of like a third teacher in the class, basically. There were the two main teachers, and I kind of still was one who would get up and help out the others in the class as we were, going through things if kids nearby had problems. And, the teachers were like, okay, yeah, he's getting it. We're just going to let him help out, essentially. So, that was where I started getting the idea of doing the developing the coding stuff. And then, I didn't really connect it until the randomizer project about taking that and actually applying it directly to the ROMs. I mean, I'd seen ROM hacks out there, but I hadn't really ever said, okay, we need to do this algorithmically, because it's a ROM hack. It's a one-off typically. You're going to change certain values,
right,
and you're done. But then with the randomizers, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, we can make these two work together really well.
That's super interesting. So, after you got past some of the things that you have to learn, I'm not a developer, I'm not a programmer, so my question may be a little ignorant here. So I just want to preface that real quick. After you'd gotten through some of the textbook lessons and things like that, what were some of the first kind of programming things that you worked on, or things that you made, creatively from your own brain?
Actually, interestingly enough, one of the areas I really got into were some competitive programming competitions that were out there. So there were competitions out there where they would basically have a thing where basically they would open up, give you 3 problems. And usually they're not, relatively they might not be too bad. So it might be, okay, here's a list of numbers. The simple one would just be sort them, find an average, find other types of things. Certain cases, one that actually kind of fits in with video games here. Mega Man bosses. I think it was inspired by whoever made this one. It was basically, okay, you have a certain number of robots that are attacking you. You get the damage table, basically. They would give you the damage table and say, okay, each of these bosses takes this much damage from each one. What's the minimum number of shots you have to take in order to beat all the bosses? So there were things like that. And so, there are things like, obviously there are things that we could sit here, there's certain algorithms we could sit here and we could come up with okay, this is an easy way to do this. There are certain cases where pretty much it's a try all combinations, and sometimes it's try all combinations, but you have to do some tricks to make it work. So there's different ways you can go about doing those types of problems. So that was something I was really interested in, so I could participate in a lot of those ones. And that's really where I took that coding piece and kind of, went to the next level. It also kind of has influenced my style, because I've never been really a person who's checked code in, because I've always been much more about style, just throw some code together really fast that runs fast enough, but doesn't necessarily remember commenting the code, so I remember what I did in that function a year later when I need to go back and edit it. It's something I'm learning to work on now as I'm getting older here, but it's definitely something I've taken a little while to build up on.
I think it's also interesting that one of the things you started investigating was how to beat certain things. And, nowadays we call that, we're looking for strats, we're investigating, we look at memory addresses and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting that you already had that thought process going even back then. That's really cool.
That's the type of crazy fun stuff. As I said, that was, I guess, racing competitive stuff I've always been interested in. I was never coordinated enough as a kid to be physically doing like that type of stuff. Like I was definitely not going to be. Maybe I could have done track if I'd really wanted to in elementary school or high school, but really that would have been about it. I was not anyone able to lift. I wasn't going to be playing any sports. I was understood the concepts. I've always had a good brain for this is the strategy, but then trying to translate that to hit the ball or shoot a ball into a basket. Forget about it. So those types of mental competitions, I guess, have always really been things that call to me.
I'm right there with you. Those are two different things, like sets of the body. Sometimes, my brain. I wish sometimes my fingers would keep up with what my brain was doing, especially as a speedrunner. So when did you discover, and how did you get into the whole speedrunning thing? What was some of your what was your experience with that?
Let's see. I'm going back. It was probably back when I was in grad school, so early 2000s, mid 2000s, I guess, actually. I remember doing Googling. It was probably just about the time that SDA started expanding past the infamous, Quake speedruns and stuff. Because PC, I never grew up really playing PC games. We had computers, but always felt like essentially a generation behind where, the modern games were. So I never really played a lot of PC games, but when I don't remember which game it was. I feel like it was some of the Mega Man type of games. It may have been Ocarina of Time, certainly could have been, but I think once I did like a search at one point for speedrun, ran into SDA, and would regularly check on what games were being uploaded, watching the Mega Man games. I think I remember at one point in the early 2000s saying, I can easily do this Mega Man 6 thing that people are doing, and then trying it for a little bit, trying to go through Windman stage, like, I can actually get to the gate at the same time as as this other guy, except he's playing on PAL. Oh. So it's really running at he's running at the 5/6 rate. So really, I'm like, okay, I'm still way behind. So it's like, I'm not gonna do that one for a while. So you mostly watched for a number of years there. Learned a lot of the stuff, as I was there, and then shortly after we had our kids move back up to our current house, I just started saying, hey, I should probably try streaming myself, doing some of these speed runs itself, because I kept saying, okay, I want to play some of these games. I like playing them fast. Why not try it? And so started doing that. I think the very first game I tried speedrunning for a little bit was Mega Man 2. I got about a 36 and a half, I want to say. I had a nasty death, if I remember correctly, too. I was playing zipless. So not great time compared to, especially what we see nowadays, where the people are, 27s without a problem and everything. But, I was at least content with that, and then discovered my old Z1 cart and was like, okay, this is one I want to play at least for a little bit, and set goals. Like, okay, try to get under an hour, hit that one a little quickly, because it turns out that if you play safe and you follow certain routes, it's, again, as long as you know your mechanics, it's not like you're going to do that first run.
No.
But, if you play in the super safe route, yeah, that wasn't too bad of a goal to hit. And then, okay, well, what about now 45? What about 40? And slowly, working that time down.
What was it? Because it sounds, by the way, it sounds like you had a very similar experience to myself. I didn't attempt to speedrun for 2 or 3 years after discovering, some of the videos and people's streams and stuff like that. What aspects, or what was the thing that kind of was appealing to you, or you found challenging as you got into this? Because there's a certain level of repetition that goes along with speedrunning. And so to continue to do something over and over again, I'm curious what it was that was appealing to you about it.
Yeah. Well, for me, it's just a case of, okay, this is something that can be done. It can be done, if I practice it, it's something I can definitely improve on considerably. And as I'm playing these games, it's like, okay, I can start to get this. Sometimes it's just a case of competitive wise. I wasn't necessarily playing for world record level in most cases. I've held a couple of world records, but especially like Zelda, where at the time, as I said, Darkwing was one of the best by far in terms of that category. I wasn't going to beat him. I knew that. So I was just trying to beat the game and saying, okay, well, can I get as I said, incrementally, can I go through those things and start seeing, okay, certain rooms, okay, I need to learn some strats for them because I'm getting bodied and getting killed. I don't have great peripheral vision, which normally you say, okay, that's not a big deal in a video game. When you're focusing on Link moving around, maybe having a Dark Knight or two who are coming along trying to hit him, you don't see those fireballs coming in from the statues that then knock you out of place and then knock you into another Dark Knight who is down here. All of a sudden, you're down 4 or 5 hearts compared to where you were, and you're about to die. So, as I said, just in terms of those challenges, things like, okay, what can I do to stay alive, like that? Like, just always want to try to get things to be the best I can if I'm touching them. Again, it doesn't have to be world record level, but about as best as I can do. And so just that goal of, there's a lot of repetition, just doing it over and over helps me to really get through and understand, try to get those better, more consistent times.
I have never attempted a Z1 speedrun myself, but it's probably I always really enjoy watching the speedrun because it always seems like there is something that is going to happen on the fly. You have to, make a decision that might alter something else that happens later in the run, or that you always have to deal sometimes with what the game is giving you with your, the random drops, which aren't so random, but all these, different types of things. And I've found that is utterly fascinating, especially to hear you and others talk through your process as you're going through this, because it seems like there's an infinite amount of things you need to be processing in your head as you're going through these runs.
Oh yeah, no, it's crazy. Especially with Z1, you really only have, I remember, Lack Attack, as he was doing some of his things here, normally speedrunners tend to split 9 splits for Zelda 1. It's, the 9 different levels in whatever order you're needing to go through them on that run. But at one point, I know Lack was actually experimenting for his splits, because really, he was like, there's really only 3 key points. Everything else can swing dramatically because, okay, I don't have enough money. My bomb count's low, things like that. So really, he was saying, candle, magical sword, and then beat the game were really the 3 checkpoints. And pretty much everything else from there, you have to do on the fly. You're not out of bombs when you come out of level 4. Well, you need a bomb to go through level 1 the fastest way. So, I've seen a bunch of different routes that were developed. Runners like, Cantaloupe Me, who comes along and you can kind of on the fly almost feel like just reroute it and not be that far off. Always made him really dangerous when there were races or tournaments because if there was a situation where, okay, I'm out of bounds somewhere, I could just reroute that one on the fly. So, he's always a really dangerous type of racer from that perspective to play against because, he can handle almost any situation. You pretty much have to on that. Or you can do what runners like JSR did and full manipulate the first portion of the game, and then that way, hopefully, you don't have anything like that happen. I mean, I did that with FF1, Final Fantasy 1 there. I basically ended up coming with a manipulation that pretty much took the RNG all the way through to chaos. So that way, I could control exactly what enemies were hitting me, how much damage they were doing, how much damage I was doing to them. And so, when I did that, actually, it was, I think, Valentine's Day night when I actually did the first time there, broke the single segment record at the time with 20 minutes. And since then, we've improved it by 25 more minutes since then with various changes. I mean, now there's a little bit of luck involved with the way I do it because I kind of have to aim for a 2-frame window at the final boss.
Yeah, 2 frames. What's 2 frames?
Yeah, exactly. Not that big deal there, but pretty much everything else there, it was just a case of, setting up that manipulation all the way through. So, I mean, you can do that type of stuff when you're working with these games. You can either go, okay, I can handle all those situations, or you try to really control those as strongly as you can there.
These manipulations are fascinating to me, and I'm curious, how did you make a discovery like that in Final Fantasy 1? Because sometimes I hear that they're done by accident, other times it's intentional. How did you come up with something like that?
Well, actually, at Speed Gaming Live 2019, which was actually held on site there before everything happened
back in the day.
World, that changed things unfortunately. But I was talking with Fiesel because again, Fiesel is well known. He runs Speed Gaming, fantastic guy, but was also known for back in the day running Final Fantasy 1. I remember back in the day with his console, whatever it was at the time, he actually would often have to play Minesweeper because he needed the capacitors, I guess, when he would reset to try to make sure memory.
Oh, wow.
Well, I guess memory wouldn't be initialized properly.
Gotcha.
So
okay,
when you're playing Final Fantasy 1, there are certain enemy groups you really need to avoid. There's an enemy that, for example, has insta-death touch. If it attacks you, it can attack you and just kill a member of your party. So you tend to want to avoid that one when you're playing, a game like this. You'll do that. So you need to know the encounter tables, and people have done research on the game. They understood the encounter tables. Okay, you take a certain number of steps. When you turn the game on, basically it says, okay, how many fights have we done since we turned the game on? That's going to tell me what enemy group I'm going to use. And then, it has its own, okay, you take these steps. On the 12th step, okay, we get into a fight or something like that. I'm oversimplifying, but giving you the gist of it. And so people have known that. And obviously, if that memory isn't reset to 0 when you play the game again a second time, now you don't know what group you're getting. You're going to get a different set of groups, and now you might run into those sorcerers who insta-kill you on an hour into the run. That's bad.
Yeah, right. So, not good.
So basically, I remember, again, watching him do that. And I was like, especially back then, because as I said, this was early 2010s, that's when I was like, okay, you're really doing a 4-hour speed run of a game, start to finish? Because, back then it really was when people were just starting to do that type of streaming. Especially with Final Fantasy, a game that can potentially have so many bad things thrown at you. But I guess he had been doing some stuff about that, and they discovered that the RNG that happens in the battles only really ticks during the battles. So once you're done with fight 1 and you go to fight 2, wherever fight 1 ended is where fight 2 picks off on the RNG. There's nothing that you can do going into menus. You could sit on the thing for 5 hours waiting. And then as soon as that happens, you get again, if you pick up literally right where you left off. So he was talking to me because he had an idea to try to, essentially try to do this type of manipulation. So he had the idea for it. He mapped it out for the first 20-ish minutes of the game. He had a path he had found, but he was getting into the first dungeon and running into a wall essentially because what he could do on the overworld, he could potentially skip some of those encounters that he'd run into because he could use a tent, save, and then get into the fight and reset really quick to skip the fight.
Got it.
Can't do that inside the dungeons. So, and he was just holding the A button during the whole fights, basically. You can't, the way that it works pretty much, if you are in a fight, the RNG changes every 2 frames. So once every 30th of a second. And so if you were to do anything other than punch with your fighters or with whoever your characters are, just literally hold down the A button and punch, then you could lose that RNG value.
Oh, wow.
So I started looking into things, discovered, hey, there's a command that you can do, because normally there's like the 4 characters. You could hold down the B button that says, okay, I want to go back a character. And apparently, obviously, during the time that he walks back and forth, the RNG isn't rolling. So you could actually, but it rolls a specific amount of time before it registers that you're holding the button down. You know, that infamous, I don't want to have you holding down a button for too long, instantly react to a button if you're holding it down, give you a little delay.
Right.
So as a result of that, I was able to actually figure out, hey, during battle, we can actually increment the RNG wherever we want to. So we can actually have a turn guaranteed. There's really only 256 possible things that can happen on a given round. There's literally it just loops on one 8-bit number, so there's only 256 possible things that can happen once you pick all your actions. And so basically I wrote a computer program to say, find me the one that I want.
Yeah, right.
And also, where do we leave it? Because as I said, remember, once the fight's done, nothing can change. So we don't just care about winning that fight. We have to leave that RNG value somewhere. So the next fight gives us the right number of enemies and all that stuff. So
that's so fascinating. So you're carrying that value with you as you're going in through that's okay. No wonder that could, no wonder it saves so much time. I mean, that's really powerful information.
Oh, absolutely. And as I said, I did that the first time, got a 234 and change. Part of that was because I kind of got lost at one point going from one town to another, because I hadn't really done that speed run aside from the practice pieces. Ness Cardinality picked that up. I mean, that guy is a genius.
Yes.
Within a day or two, he had picked up the manipulation, basically did the exact same run I did, and got like a 231, and then broke the 230 barrier with a slightly faster chaos fight. And then after that, it was, okay, I would come up with a new route for a little while there that would improve it. Ness Cardinality would execute it and get a better time. And so we traded world record back and forth for a bit there, and then I was able to, I ended up kind of going desperation style and saying, well, since we're controlling that RNG and it's advancing a fixed amount of time, if we maybe, there's an item called the Bane Sword in the game. Again, I'm not sure how familiar you are. Basically, cast a poison gas spell that's an instant death spell. Yes. But against bosses, you're not really supposed to be able to hit that. They left a tiny chance in there. It's like 3 in 256 chance. So just over 1% chance of it hitting, that fluke. Okay, I'm about dead. I've got a black wizard who can't really do anything. Chaos just casts Tier 4. There's no way I'm going to kill him now. Okay, I'm just going to throw my desperation thing. And, similar to Dungeons & Dragons, where you hope that you get that one lucky roll and get critical to beat the game. That's kind of what they left in there. And so I figured out, okay, if I aim for such and such audio cue, that's about where one of those RNG values is, so I can actually kind of aim for that, essentially music-wise on the final boss, which saves. I could beat the final boss without doing that, but the fight can take 3 minutes because you have to go 11 rounds nowadays to be able to kill Chaos. Whereas that instant death sword, you can do it 1 round. So it saves a ton of time, but it's a big risk at the end of the run.
This is something interesting that brings up, and I'm still don't quite understand. Maybe you can help me out here a little bit, understand a little better. I hear quite often we know you have a 1 in 256 chance of doing so and so thing. There's this value that's available, and I understand. We don't have source code, right? So how are we? Or maybe we do. How do we know, or how are we identifying these chances that exist in these games?
Well, what some people have done, especially with the emulators that are available out there. There's a lot of tools that have been built into them, like FCEUX has it, it's especially part of BizHawk because that uses some of that core as well, to actually essentially do what they call disassembling the code, which basically people have said, okay, there's, 05 here that corresponds to this command.
Got it.
And so people can kind of, piece that bit together. And so with the case of FF1, they know that the battle algorithm is just based on a certain table of memory, because here's the thing, you're talking about an NES. Random numbers aren't exactly easy to come by because you have to do something to make those numbers random. Right. And so what, some games, Zelda 1 does, it has some, things that are running behind the scenes that are changing numbers every frame. There are certain games that will use your input. I believe Nightmare on Elm Street has one of those where basically it uses your input to affect the random numbers. So that way you literally would have to press the same buttons for the exact same frames every time to get the same RNG. Final Fantasy 1 just had a lookup table behind the scenes of 256 numbers, and it would just, every single time you need to pull a number, go to the next one in the table.
Got it. Okay.
And go through that. And what people have found when they look through that table was, okay, there's, all the numbers essentially from 0 to 255, but they've replaced a couple of numbers with zeros. I think there was like an extra 0 in there. And when people went back and disassembled the algorithm for the battles, what they found was when you take, that number out of the table, they tend to multiply it by the spell power or something like that. Mm-hmm. And if that number turned out to be 0, after you do that multiplication, then that's basically that crit roll that you get. And so the spell breaks through even if you're immune to whatever it is. And so that's how they know in this specific case it's 3 and 256, because there's 2 zeros and a 1 in that table, and that gives you the number you need to be able to get the Bane Sword to hit chaos.
Thank you for clarifying that, because I've done a little bit of work in statistics and things like that, and a lot with modeling software nowadays, we can actually, we can run something a million times if we need to get to some of these, and so the fact that we have access, and I've always wondered that, because it didn't seem like the NES was as sophisticated as enough to, create a true random number of some sort. So pretty cool that someone can do it.
And I mean, again, that's kind of what you do with, they do with the Zelda 1 manipulation. It's, they start the game so that way, and they start the timer at a certain point, and they listen for a certain audio cue to enter level 1, which means a fixed amount of music has passed. Yeah. And so that's essentially and I think what they basically mapped out in the end was essentially there's 4 possible numbers that you could go in on, like 4 time intervals, and of course I haven't studied it enough, manipulation enough to know exactly how much of a window you get there, but like each one of those has like a couple of frame windows.
Oh yeah, Lack mentioned that. But it's an amount where you can get pretty consistent about it. Like it's a frame window wide enough. It's not still that large, still pretty tight, but it's something that the runners have gotten good enough at. Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about musicians who play, various songs. Like if I'm playing a flute, which I've played growing up a little bit, but I was again never great at it, but I was decent. But if you're playing a song, I'm going to hit the notes on these certain beats. It's similar idea of at least using that to get your approximate timings down, at least get yourself close to where you want to be.
That's so interesting. You mentioned a little bit of a musical background, because quite often during this podcast, people have talked about their musical backgrounds. I did music in high school and college, and it really gives you this approach to repetition and how to improve your performance every single time you're doing it that carries over so perfectly to speedrun if you can take that approach with you.
Oh, absolutely. And then, I play flute. I played a little around on piano.
Trombone player.
Yeah, nice. I was never really able to, do two-hand stuff on like a piano. Like for some reason, as I was learning stuff, I always had problems putting 2 hands together. But flute was fine, so that was what I played growing up. And some improv type stuff in terms of trying to, by ear figure out melodies. Of course, like Final Fantasy songs, Terra's theme was one that I, of course, was like, okay, I got to figure this one out by ear.
Yes.
But, as I said, did that. Actually, fortunately, that's how I met my wife in Pep Band. So,
oh, no way.
We ended up meeting because of playing the instrument. But, as I said, that type of timing thing was always one. I was like, okay, we've got that. And, as you said, that's definitely right. Bringing that type of mentality forward. I hadn't thought about that. But, that type of practice, repetition I had to do on that. Yeah, pretty much similar idea. Okay. This part didn't work. Reset the save state. Try again. Just like, okay, going back 2 measures. Playing through again. Try again.
That's so geeky. Yeah, I met my wife in music as well. So she was on the dance side of things. But, marching bands, they have the color guard and things like that. And so that's a funny story. Where a lot of, especially music or creative type folks, they sometimes have similar backgrounds like that. So it doesn't surprise me that you met your wife that way. So very cool. Okay, so I really want to get it. I'm really kind of blown away by where randomizers have come, and I don't remember them honestly before the Z1 randomizer. I don't know what was out there. So perhaps you can set the stage a little bit. How did you end up? What was the community like, and how did you end up, or what even gave you the idea to randomize and come up with this whole randomizer thing? And maybe we need to talk about what exactly a randomizer is.
So basically, I mean, if we go to the idea of a randomizer, the idea of it is basically you're going to, again, we were talking about ROM hacking a little bit earlier on, but the idea is basically to change something in the ROM so that when you play the game, it's had some changes to it. You don't even know what it's going to be. I mean, the impetus for me, at least, doing this was actually Lack Attack, going back to Lack. I was sitting in an airport. I want to say it was in St. Louis, actually. I can pretty much nail exactly where that was. Late November, early December of 2014 there. I was, going to be flying back on a red eye, and I was killing some time because I wanted to stay awake before I got on the red eye, so that way I could try to actually sleep on the plane and stuff. And I was watching Black play on my phone on the airport Wi-Fi as I was waiting for everything to happen. And he was going to level 9, and he was making a comment, again, completely innocuous at the time. He was just like, this is really cool getting to play this game over and over, but I kind of wish, that we could relive this game again from the beginning. Essentially, is what he said, and something about that just clicked for me. I was like, I wonder if I could do that. Now, Zelda ended up being a perfect game for this because I immediately downloaded as much information as I could before I got on the plane. I spent half of the flight home that I probably should have been spending sleeping, looking at this data to try to understand what happened. But it turns out, the lore on Zelda 1, again, I'm not 100% positive. I'm pretty sure that it's been said a number of times over, is that it was essentially meant to be a build your own dungeon type of game at first. And then as development went, they said, okay, you know what, let's not just go with that, let's just make its own game. But when you then go and you look at the data, especially, again, unfortunately, a bunch of people had done similar things where they had either done their own hacks or what have you, and therefore had compiled a bunch of information on roundhacking.net. I went and looked at that. Well, there were a bunch of tables that were in the memory, and so there was a table that corresponded to doors in a room, like the vertical doors. The next table corresponded to the horizontal ones, and then what enemies were where, what shape the room was, what item you could find if you were in that room, etc. And so, fortunately, in that game, it was very nicely laid out. So at that point, it was a case of, okay, I go into this one table if I wanted to shuffle the items, because that was the very first thing I did. I'm not going to touch the overworld. I'm literally just going to maybe switch the items between dungeons. And so I went and looked at that table, found out what each item was, and then had my program swap them around. And then we quickly discovered, hey, wait a second, you can't just do that randomly on its own, because level 7, which in the vanilla speed game is under the lake. You have to play the recorder to evaporate the lake and go in. If you don't do checks, 1 in every 11 Cs, the recorder ends up in that lake. And all of a sudden, now you can't beat level 7. You're broken. So we quickly realizing, okay, we can't just randomly shuffle this. We have to start putting logic checks in place. And sometimes those logic checks can be simple. As I said, recorder can't be on level 7. That was one of the first things I did, was I hard-coded some of these. But then, what happens if the recorder's in level 4, which you need a raft to get to, and there's a raft in level 7, which you need the recorder to get to? You start getting those cyclical things.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, I tried to hard-code some of those, and then I think ended up with a case of 3 steps, because a ladder had to be involved as well, or something else like that. And so finally, basically just ended up writing some code that basically said, okay, I have this current inventory. What can I get to? If I can get to it, add it to my inventory, and then go through. So the idea of sanity checking kind of developed there as we were going on. And there's still places where stuff like that can occasionally pop up in any of these games. But, that ended up being a key step in terms of, building that. Was just, okay, got to make sure that you can actually beat the game. Make sure you can actually, kill appropriate enemies to get to the item that you need when things like that happen. So, as I said, started out simple and then got more and more complicated.
One of the things that I remember, or at least my memory of that experience when I originally played Zelda 1 as a kid, and this really captured my imagination, is it didn't seem like there were a lot of restrictions on where you could go, what you could do. I mean, there was really a freedom to it. Now, as I've gotten older, I did notice, okay, now I'm noticing, well, they're giving me the item to progress to the next place, and I totally get that. But so I find that interesting, it was the logic part of it. Was that one of the longest parts of the process? Because that sounds like that would have been the thing to get into the way, but the game does offer some freedom and flexibility to begin with at a core level.
Absolutely, and especially with Zelda 1, as I said, as that game, it has that flexibility. I mean, if you look at the leaderboards for that game, there's a bunch of different categories that you can do. You can actually do reverse dungeon order, where you really actually, cool. The rule of it is you have to get Triforce from level 8 first, then level 7, 6, 5, all the way back to level 1 before you get to the end. With the randomizer, they actually ended up putting a patch in there that said start by killing Ganon and work backwards. There's a patch you could do to open up level 9 so you don't have to actually have the the Triforces to get in the first place. So some people even have the crazy idea, okay, go kill Ganon first, then go to level 8, then go to level 7, and then ends when you get the Triforce out of level 1. So, there's so much flexibility. And, we were talking about that earlier, that need to adapt as you're playing. Zelda 1 pretty much, you could go into a dungeon, grab the item, and leave, and come back later for the Triforce. So it was built wide open. I mean, they had recommendations. That's why they gave the level numbers I think that they did. So that way, you get used to the game with level 1, level 2. Then you start getting harder enemies in 3 and 4, and you really don't get the nasty Wizrobes until level 6, for example. So they did a good job, on that side, building things up on the difficulty. But technically, the game was already naturally open enough where you could do pretty much anything you want to on that routing. So it really made really nice for the randomizer idea, because, okay, I walk into a cave, here's level 8. Well, I can at least try to explore and see what I can do, because, we can probably get through and get some things and go from there.
I can't quite. Can you remind me, when was the actual time period where version 1.0 came out? Because I can't quite remember exactly.
It was released on Pi Day, so I want to say it had to have been March 14th of 2015 was 1.0 of this one, because it's 31415.
It seemed like, and this could just be my memory. That's probably pretty good, by the way, to remember the exact day. But
it's Pi Day, so
got it. Okay,
I specifically released it on Pi Day, so
it's cool. That's geeky, and I love it. But I remember it catching on pretty quickly, and it seemed like within about 6 months or a year, you could not turn on Twitch without seeing speedrunners, who were taking a break from their traditional speedrun because they were racing the randomizer, they were having fun with the randomizer. Did you expect that the community would adopt it so quickly?
I didn't. At the time, I was just like, okay, this would be a cool idea to put out there. And I remember, starting it out, Dark going into races with literally 4 people. I think Cantaloupe, Darkwing, Black, and myself, joining an SRL race or something like that with one of these randomized seeds for fun. And then, as it got closer and closer, people definitely seemed interested, but I definitely never expected to get a community as big as they've developed into now. I mean, again, we see tons of randomizers now all over the place. I think before Z1's randomizer release, there were a couple of them out there. I mean, there was a Metroid randomizer or 2 that were out there. Again, not quite at the levels where they're at right now. They're mostly, some earlier ones. I remember seeing a door randomizer at the time. There were some item randomizers as well. I believe the Pokemon randomizer was also out at the time. But those were really the 2 big ones out there. I mean, I think Desirect may have had some of an early version of the Link to the Past randomizer, but it definitely wasn't. I don't know the exact timing on when those early versions were, and it definitely was not, anywhere near where that one has evolved to nowadays. So really, those were the first couple that I can think of at the time before Z1 even came out.
You'll have to remind me, but I know we're on version 3 point something, whatever. I'm curious how the randomizer has evolved and what has changed, updated. Where are we at now? Take us through the history a little bit of the randomizer.
Yeah, so when I first released the randomizer, the 1.0 official release, you could technically at the time it couldn't even force Ganon to be required. It might happen, but depending on the flag stuff, there was never a flag on there that could force Ganon to happen, even on that first version. That was one of those first requests that came in. It was like, okay, we have something like that, and I was able to figure that piece out. But the first version, allowed you to shuffle around on the overworld where all the caves were. So you walk into a cave, you wouldn't know if it would be a dungeon, if it would be one of the muggers who say, give me some money, or anything like that. Within the dungeons, they were still their own vanilla shapes, but the rooms could possibly be picked up and moved around, so that way you wouldn't necessarily know where to go in the dungeon to go find the bow. It would be or where to go to find the Triforce. It would be somewhere in the dungeon, but you had to do that. So that was kind of like the first version of that. And most of the time, one of my design principles I've done with these randomizers is to make sure that you can toggle whatever options you want to. So if you really didn't want those rooms being moved around, you can set a certain flag and then all the rooms stay in their normal location. So again, I always wanted that to be flexible for people. Sometimes that's a little too crazy, because then there are people like, oh, well, how are we going to race, and then having to argue over all the flags. But that's always been one of those things for me. Exactly. And then over time we evolved. We made it so that way Ganon could get locked, or Zelda could get locked in her room, and you had to be Ganon, get the Triforce from him before you could open the door. Then one of the main ones that I really like, one of the things I want to usually do is make sure items are important. That you're going to use items. The bow, obviously, be used. There's certain enemies you can only kill with the bow, convenience thing on that. But there's certain items that just were useless. And especially one of the things I was noticing as we were doing some of those early versions, the map. The map is kind of useless because, okay, you go into a dungeon. The compass is useful because now I know which room that had. But, if you're playing with the normal shapes of the dungeons, I walk into a level and there are people who could, within a room, tell you, oh, this is level 4, even without a map on the screen, just from where you appear on the mini screen, what enemies pop up.
Right.
A lot of people out there did a ton of work on that and be able to identify that. Which is okay, great, but now the map's useless. People are just going to walk by it.
Yeah.
And so one of those versions, I said, okay, let me see if I can make my own shapes as opposed to just having the fixed levels. So that was definitely one of the, I don't know if that was 2.5 or 3.5, I'm blanking on the exact pieces, but somewhere around there, one of those big version updates was allowing people to basically have a map that has been custom generated that they don't know until they play the seed what the maps are even going to look like. And I mean, that's gone through a number of iterations because the first couple of versions were very blocky. A lot of squarish maps, maybe a little bit of stuff here and there, but the shapes weren't necessarily that interesting. And over time, we've been able to get that to be, much more interesting shapes where a lot of times people will be essentially playing the game that they will call name that ink blot to try to figure out exactly what the map looks like once they find that. Even that's got to be balanced a bit because for a while there, okay, that's great. There's a map in the dungeon. Well, you have to bomb this one specific wall to go find the map. Kind of defeats the purpose of having a map in the dungeon in the first place. And then, okay, if I want to find that map, well, I have to go run around that entire dungeon and bomb almost every single wall to try to find that one wall. There's definitely a lot of user feedback that came back and saying, okay, that needs to get fixed. So, map placement, things like that end up coming into things as a result.
How did you go about how do you create or tell the game to, procedurally generate this or to create this, a randomly generated map?
Yeah, well, part of that's, that is not done on the NES cart. That's definitely done with the randomizer program, and then we just push that data into there. Trying to procedurally generate that. Yeah, you'd be in big trouble. You'd be sitting there for 5 hours minimum waiting. Okay, I want to do this race. Can you please get going so I can get started? But
you're saying that the NES doesn't have that kind of processing power. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, maybe. It's not so bad. But, and as I was sitting there, trying to come up with the idea of this, one of the things I ended up saying, basically just come up with an algorithm essentially how to try to grow those levels. So what ends up happening, it's actually really cool if you've never seen it before, but the levels 1 through 6, you were to take those on the NES and you were to map them out. There's actually a map out there. If you search for, I think, Zelda 1 dungeon map, and it's there's a map that actually shows you essentially how those maps fit together, puzzle piece.
Oh yes, I've seen those. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's really cool.
Yeah, so basically, and what ends up happening is that level 1 to 6 will show up. It's like an 8x16 grid. There's a few gaps, and actually, what ends up happening is that each of those gaps corresponds to a staircase behind the scenes. So cool. Let me put it this way: for a given dungeon, to put this into perspective, you've got these games now that come out here that are megabytes large, right, and all that stuff. Individual room in the Zelda game, 6 bytes determine the entire shape of that room. 6 bytes, exactly, not megabytes, not even kilobytes. 6 bytes. Yeah. And there's actually even a little bit of room to spare in there. I think if things ever need to be done, but they had to pack that information in order to really do that. And so, again, you can get a ton of flexibility with it, as you're trying to build this stuff because it's just that little bit of information there. But you work with building out these maps now. Now it's a case of well, all I need. And the thing is, as part of those 6 bytes, the game actually doesn't know what level you're in. That information is not stored in the game. There's a thing that says, okay, when I go into a cave in the overworld, okay, now I'm in level 1, so I'll go load the data. But technically, if there was a door, you could walk from level 1 to level 2 and, internally, or actually level 1, level 2 are a bad example, 2 and 3, because they're actually next to each other on that combined map. You could actually, you were to hack a door, and you could walk from level 2 to level 3 if you had the door there. The game won't even care. But the problem is those Triforce pieces end up being a problem there because...
That makes sense.
Basically, what ends up happening is if you walk in level 2, take a door over or a staircase over to level 3 and pick up a Triforce, the game's going to say, oh, I entered from level 2. This is level 2's Triforce.
Oh, it does keep a track of that. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, I got
Yeah, it
you.
keeps
Wow.
track of just from wherever you entered. It
Just from
saves
where you
that
entered.
number
Got
when
it.
you go in, but there's no information that says this room belongs to level 2, this room belongs to level 3.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I discovered, and sometimes when we would have bugs where I would accidentally have a door that let you go from one level to another, is someone go grab the Triforce from the other level, they come back in trying to find maybe an item that they were missing and find the second Triforce. They pick that one up and the game would say, oh, that's also level 2's Triforce.
Oops.
And then you get to level 9 where you need 8 Triforce pieces, and Cunning would come in and basically be saying, okay, you don't have level 3 Triforce, so I'm not letting you into level 9. And you couldn't go back and pick it up from level 3 because you already picked it up, and the game says, oh, nope, you already picked up the secret there. So, yeah, so that's part of the reason we don't, right now at least. I know the Z1M1, I think, can allow things to switch between dungeons. There's a combination randomizer there for Zelda 1 and Metroid 1 that lets you, you can play that one. And it's just amazing some of the stuff that people have done to basically make these things work together. And that one, I think, has the ability for you to possibly take a staircase from one dungeon to another. I haven't put that one in there yet on that side of things. But, there are things that people can do from that side to really go crazy.
You've mentioned that people were playing, obviously it takes a community to find the bugs because people need to play the game and everything like that. When you've approached new changes or bug fixes or any of that kind of thing, has it been you, or has anybody else contributed to the project? Because it's surprising how far it's come, especially, for over the years. So.
Yeah, no, and I mean, what ends up happening usually is I have a beta version, and what'll happen is if I've got a new version that I'm about to push out that I think I can do, I'll usually release it as a beta version, have anyone who wants to, I'll post it in the Discord, say, okay, beta version's going to be up here, here's the link so you can update it if you need to, and people will play through that one. They will, kind of as a community, they know, okay, if we're playing a version that's beta, we're not going to race it, or we'll race it, but if it breaks, we acknowledge we're all going to just forfeit the seed and just not count that seed, because obviously we don't want to do that. But there have been a number of people who, I can think of Panzer Dave, Amazing Ampharos, a few others who just simply always tend to find those bugs. They get that thing, hey Fred, you've got a Chevy room, which is one of these rooms that has basically a moat. It's kind of got an island in the middle. People, it almost looks like a Chevy icon. That's why people call it the Chevy room. It's got, you can enter from the 4 sides. There's just a couple of blocks in the riddle. And they're like, Fred, guess where we just found the ladder? Laying on the middle of that Chevy island, which obviously you can't go get.
It's been a little bit of a problem.
So we've had that one happen. We've had Zelda be found inside a solid block. The block like this, and she'd be sitting right in the middle, and the only way to beat the game is to actually get to her hitbox, and that wasn't happening. So we've had a few.
Just curious, what caused that? What caused Zelda to spawn there? That was really interesting.
Well, actually, it was just a case of, that was one of the first versions where I allowed, normally when I first did this, if you think about a puzzle piece, bunch of puzzle pieces, what I would essentially do is, okay, here's level 1. I'm going to pick up all the rooms from the level. I'm going to shuffle them up in my box. I'm going to put them all back down and do some sanity checking to make sure that, everything's in place. Well, I'd had the idea at one point there, well, what if we don't just do it that way, but we pick up the rooms from all the levels and then take a bunch out and put them back into level 1, take the next set out for level 2 and all that stuff as you go through. And that room with the square blocks only exists in level 7. You never notice it if you are, watching a speed run, because you never go through that room.
Right, you never see it.
If you're playing a casualty, you might miss that room completely anyway because it's in the dark. Naturally, when you walk in there, it's a room. There's 8 keys in there. It's one of those rare master rooms where if you kill the one specific keys, or the first specific enemy, they all go poof.
Right.
That's always fun in the randomizer too, because sometimes you'll kill an enemy and one enemy just in a room, and all of a sudden, poof, like a dig dog, you'll play the recorder, and then all of a sudden it's dead because the thing spawns. Oh wait, the first enemy died. Poof, oops. All the children died too. So that's always can be a interesting experience there. So it works. I mean, that one's the prize for the winner. But you never see that room in the vanilla speedrun. But as I said, that room also doesn't exist in level 9. So when I expanded that and said, okay, let's use the pool of all rooms, well, that room now could appear in level 9. I hadn't put the sanity check to say, hey, this is an illegal room for Zelda to be in. And Fred, we may have a problem. Getting that message on Discord. It's like, okay, we're going to patch this beta version here right now to now include that. And there we go.
It's pretty cool that you can get that kind of feedback, and that's fast. Thanks for sharing that story. I have been I do. You said if you watch enough streams or you watch enough speedruns, or speedrun enough yourself, you'll run into these things like that. Or you play the randomizer, so it's cool that it's just fun to kind of understand why some of those things do happen, and understanding some of the limitations of the game. That actually is really helpful. I remember I played through the game a bunch as a kid, but I don't remember rarely ever beating the game, and as an adult recently just went back a few months ago and beat the game, and I was surprised at how many rooms I actually didn't have to go through to end up beating the game, which just on a casual playthrough was kind of surprising to me. I mean, I thought that was once again an interesting choice by the developers and the designers that's going to give you a reason to play the game. Maybe we play the game again. Maybe we want to take a different path and try something different in the game.
Absolutely, and that's, as you said, part of the fun on that. There's certain levels where level 8 ends up being, it's the shape like the lion's head or whatever the any key is it's referred to, because of the Simpsons reference there. Is how we always refer to it, because when you replace, when you pick it up, your key count is replaced with the A, which we always just say it must be for A for any. So which one's the any key?
What's it?
Standard Simpsons reference there.
Yes, absolutely.
But, if you look through that level, if you're doing a speed run, you go through. Now I'm doing a quick count in my head. I think 9 rooms in the level if you count the Triforce room. That's it. But really, it's meant to be like one of those almost like mini maze-like things. Like you can get the magical key in there if you go a few other rooms one way. You can go get the book, which everyone loves totally.
Almost forgot about the book.
We have a bunch of options in the randomizer to improve the functionality of the book. Yeah. Well, those were some fun ones. I guess suggested, someone, Jam Eviler suggested to me, hey, instead of the fire, which of course can damage Link, which is why no one likes that, because the fire really just sits there. You shoot your magic wand. Now the magic wand puts fire at the end. That's great, except it barely hurts the enemies. It's like a wood sword stab. And you can walk into that fire and take damage yourself. So really, it's more of a hindrance than a benefit getting that book. I mean, I guess it lights up a room for you. If it's dark, that's really probably the only other real case. You don't have to switch your candle, which you already have in the inventory at that point if you're having the book and wand combination. So I guess that's really the one place where it's useful. But, Jamie said to me, hey, could we make that be a bomb instead of a bomb explosion instead of a fire? And, that's incredibly overpowered. Hence the reason that when you pick that option, the book is only found in a shop, and you have to pay like $200 for it.
That's fair. Fair trade.
Yeah, fair enough. So I was trying to make it a little bit harder there, but basically we kind of, again, that one came about from that. And then there were other cases where, we were talking with people. I had been working on one idea for that, and then someone had said, hey, this could be an atlas, or like I had the idea of maybe make it an atlas. So now when you have that, you essentially have all the maps of all the dungeons. So again, that's not the price to pay. Yeah. Do I actually pick up the book? Because, if I use the wand, I'll have fire, but now I'll know all the shapes.
Oh,
when I walk into the dungeon, so I don't have to go finding that map. I know exactly what the level looks like. So, that making those good, types of decisions for a player. Do I pick this up? Do I not pick this up? Was always a cool one. And then I don't remember what it was, but I think I was talking with Crimson Avix at the time, and we said, and something that he said inspired me to now add a different feature to the book, where it basically was like the slab in Final Fantasy 1, where all the old men in the game, or all the NPCs, would just say the same piece of text originally. It would just say, like, I don't speak English, or Lupa, or something like that. Kupo. And when you find the book, now you've got essentially your dictionary, and now they can actually give you the hints and actually give you their actual text. So that's a common one that we see people sometimes play with, just because, okay, I can translate now I get the hints. We'll set the helpful hints to be on. The hints in the game can either be, just community junk hints, like various, phrases and stuff.
Memes, or whatever,
Yeah, exactly, all that. Or they can be actual helpful hints to tell you, okay, the bow is in level 1. Or the magical boomerang is in level 5, aka just ignore level 5 because you definitely don't need that item. Mm-hmm. Things like that can be there. So again, part of that type of decision making there makes it that way. Okay, if you pick up that book in that scenario and you've got those hints set right, now you have a potential benefit to do that. And then you as a player, do I want to risk that fire thing? Do I go out of my way to try to find the book to get those hints? Because now those hints might save me a lot of time in level 9. The hints in level 9 are pretty powerful. Say, are the silvers in level 9? If they are, which quadrant of level 9 are they in? So that way you can go try to quickly find them. They say, okay, where's Ganon? Where's Zelda? Or where's the compass, which therefore lets you find Zelda. So they basically give you strong hints on that. And so that type of information can be really powerful to have when you're in a racing type of environment.
Yeah.
So, again, try to have that balance.
I love the idea of improving upon different, or even just changing different ways that things work in the game. I remember thinking to myself, first of all, when I was a kid, I remember really enjoying the wand. I think it looked cool. It had a cool little thing. And then as I'm actually playing with it in the game, I'm like, what's the purpose of this? I really had that thought process. Like, I'm not quite sure what this actually does in this game. Like, what's the point? So really appreciate it.
It's got the white sword strength, the wand, for example. Like when you use that as the spell to cast the spell, it's all like the white sword, so the mid-level sword. But it's actually really interesting because I guess they didn't. I've never seen the official thing on it, but there's always been a funky hitbox, which people have associated with. Like sometimes you'll swing the sword and you'll hit an enemy off to the side that you're like, how did I hit that enemy? And from what I've heard as a rumor, as I said, I don't know if it's officially ever been confirmed by Nintendo, but the idea is that the wand was going to have a swinging animation. And so as part of the swing, like it would like basically go like above you and then out. Right. And if there was an enemy above you,
hit
that
cool.
enemy on the way of going through. And they didn't put the animation in.
Right.
But the hitbox piece of it still applies, apparently.
That's a good question, actually, from the chat. Is there a note limit on the whistle song? Are you aware of?
Oh, yeah. So that was one of the fun things that I added back in the day. So basically, or not back in the day, but, I found where they put the recorder song into the thing, and inspired partly by the Final Fantasy IV Free Enterprise randomizer, which has, they've done a ton of awesome stuff with that. But one of the things they did was they replaced the song you would play if you went down and, Edward the Bard would play the Twin Harp, which would then, break the spell that the Dark Elf was using on you, and then you could attack the Dark Elf and, actually beat him. Mm-hmm. But, normally it was a certain song in the game. They actually were able to replace that music with various other songs from other games. It's really well done. Those of you who haven't seen that, definitely check that one out, because they do some great stuff with that.
Yeah.
And so I said, okay, well, let's see, inspired by that, let me at least change some of the recorder tunes. There's definitely over 100 recorder tunes that are now potentially in the game. Wow. There's not really a length limit on the length of the songs that you can put in there. I mean, I'm sure at some point there would be. The main issue ends up being usually if you play it on a screen with a secret, then after like the 4-second mark, when you start getting that do type of thing, it cuts the song off. So I usually have been trying to keep them short for that perspective, so that way I can, you hear most of it or almost all of it when that happens, but some of them can go longer there, and I try not to get them cut off ideally, but some of them will go a little longer. And so if you're on the overworld and you're just warping from one place to the next, you'll you hear a little more of it.
It also feels characteristic to the game. Like may have been what could have been done, back in the 80s when the game was first created. So
yeah, I mean, the music engine, again, I haven't done a ton of like, anything yet in terms of, okay, let's go try to randomize like the overworld music or what have you. But, it's basically essentially behind the scenes. It's here's your notes for all intents and purposes. Here's how long the note needs to be. And then what pitches do we play? So it's essentially just stored there in the memory like that. So it was, again, going back to the music background, as we were just talking about earlier, that therefore made it easy for me to basically say, okay, let me go find a piece of sheet music, that corresponded to some Final Fantasy VI music, for example, grab the melody from that, and now just translate that over into the notes I needed to make that work.
One of the things I find still endlessly fascinating is just how much the randomizer speedrunning community has grown together. And I mean, you can get on Twitch right now. I'm sure somebody's doing an Ocarina of Time random. There's all these, their randomizers have just, permeated the entire community. Yeah. When you were first working on this project and released it, I mean, did you could you have guessed where the Z1 randomizer ends up, or where just the randomizer community in general has grown to?
Yeah, no, I definitely never saw any of that coming. I just figured, okay, it'd be a nice little diversion that a few people might potentially play as, here and there, little bits of things, but then seeing, all the different people in the community have come along, the tournaments that popped up, all the different groups that there are weekly Seeds of the Week now for this one. I've seen stuff like that again with all the other randomizers as well, but then seeing the feedback into the original game has been really cool. There have been a lot of top level runners in Z1 who I think, I mean, maybe they did a little bit of stuff here and there before then, but I met them primarily through the randomizer, and then all of a sudden they started playing. You have your Unos, you have BTs, you have RC Drone. I remember RC Drone was at the time had seemed to basically be just someone who had joined our first randomizer tournament. We didn't know much about him, and he swept through the the bracket there. I barely snuck out a win against him in like the first round there when I drew him, and he was in level 9 before me, but it was just the standard case of level 9. He took one turn, I took another, and my turn ended up being the correct path in the end. But he swept through that, and he started playing the game. He's held the world record. He took the world record from Lack at one point there, in terms of playing the game. So all these different runners. Unos has a ton of routing on things. Basically, it's come down a ton of stuff like almost like room by room timings for some of these routes. Like you could say to Unos, okay, I was thinking about such and such pathing on the overworld, and he had a spreadsheet he could pull up and say, okay, this is where it's going to be. It takes this much time compared to the thing like that. So I mean, there's been a bunch of people who have come back and forth. I mean, not a ton of glitches we've necessarily found that have helped things out. I know there have been a glitch that's been discovered during one of the tournaments for Vanilla Z1 that was actually essentially the first case of what's called the Rue Quarter, where you could glitch into, do a block clip like you can into the water, and then if you have the recorder pick you up and go over one of those raft tiles, apparently it can essentially wrong warp you compared to where the level was. Basically moves you, instead of moving you onto the level, it would move you diagonally from the level, which ended up saving some time, especially on second quest for the original vanilla game, because it got you to level 9 a heck of a lot quicker than regular walking. Like, it was actually a case where you would actually recorder twice in order to get to level 9. You still got there faster than walking from, the closest other walking point. So, and as I said, Rooslugs had come in there. I think he played some of the randomizer as well, too. But he's proven to be really solid on a number of those categories. There's been a ton of feedback both ways, as I said, over time here.
I'm glad you're mentioning those runners too, because one of the things that I think makes racing randomizers so fun and entertaining to watch is that you can take somebody like Lack Attack or somebody who has a PB that's 4 minutes slower than that, but they can still be competitive because maybe they take a right path. Maybe they find something that one of the others didn't. The luck aspect is really quite fun.
Yeah, there's again a couple of different skill sets that are involved with it. Obviously, the execution of being able to fight through those levels. Okay, I ended up in a level with Dark Nuts and Wizrobes. Okay, I need to, fight that. Obviously, someone like Lack Attack, Cantaloupe, all those have the advantage there.
Right, totally.
There's also the overworld routing piece that comes in. Okay, how do I most efficiently check all these checks, see where my dungeons are? When I'm in a dungeon, do I make a push? Do I say, okay, I'm coming back later because there's no way I'm fighting through this first room, so let me come back later when I get better equipment? Those types of decisions all come into play, and those end up really making things interesting.
The right now, currently, there's an actual SMB3 randomizer tournament going on, and I'm curious when that started for you and what led you to try to randomize SMB3.
Well, I think after I released Z1 and I've been working on that for a little bit, sometimes when I'm working on projects, I tend to burn out for a little bit and then come back later. Everyone goes through that in various cases, but Z1, I think I had hit a comfort point on that. I was looking around for other projects. I started working a little bit on a Final Fantasy IV one, which was nowhere near the free enterprise level of it. They made a great concept there. Board Face and Rivers working on that to be able to have the ability to do the open world. Mine had just been let's randomize some of the stats in the first game, randomize what spells you get, things like that. And I think I hit a wall on that one for a little bit, so I was looking around for other things. I don't know if Skybills specifically was the one who had inspired me at the time to try that one, or if it was someone else. Skybills is the name that's popping up in my head right now, so we'll give her credit for that one. But just
it wouldn't be surprising because she's pretty damn good at their randomizers.
No, she's really good at that one. And so the idea of SMB3 had popped up as well at some point, and I went looking for it. I think Ibuba may have been had started working on one at one point, but had run into some issues. Like there's certain forts that couldn't randomize at the time because key locks were getting messed up, and so I had poked around a little bit with that. Very different game to randomize than D1. The data was definitely laid out very differently, a little bit more complex, because I mean, it was a much later game in the NES cycle anyway. But so I ended up doing things like, okay, mix up what levels you run into, find the enemies, mix those up. Was able to fix the fort thing, so pretty much forts can, for the most part, the orb that you grab, apparently the orb had some value associated with it that would say which lock on the overworld do you unlock. So it's like, the orb in the data behind the scenes would have a 0, 1, or 2, and so if it had the 0, it would unlock lock 0, essentially. The 1 would unlock lock 1. So I was able to then allow you to basically move some of those forts around and shuffle them around and just fix that number to do that. But that ended up being a bit of digging into the assembly there, watching numbers and saying, okay, where the heck did this number come from, and using that disassembly and tracing it back to get through.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it's a bit more complicated or sophisticated, because on the surface, as a viewer, I'm like, well, you run from left to right. You've got a couple levels. It seems like you can just put the levels in different places. But you're right. That game came out way later on in the NES life cycle, so it makes absolute sense that the code is hopefully a bit more sophisticated at that time, has a little bit more going on to it.
And ran into some issues, like, for example, some of those pipes that you would take that would take you, like, I want to say, for example, let's say World 7, the Tanuki Fort, the one where you go in, there's no enemies, you have to go into a pipe, and then go down a pipe, and you get the Tanuki suit, so you can go fly up and find Boom Boom. It's essentially like a mini puzzle level. It turns out, sometimes if you were to go into those bonus areas, that's stored in a different section of memory, and I still haven't exactly traced out exactly what it is, but basically, if you don't change a certain value in memory when you do that, you go through that pipe to go to the Tanuki room, and you end up in a room where you just fall and die.
It's a troll pipe.
Pretty much, it's a troll pipe that takes you to a room and dies, because apparently it's looking for something completely different.
Wow.
So, behind the scenes, there's some of that stuff going on. As I said, I still haven't figured out exactly what it is to make it like where I could just switch every level around. So certain levels that tend to end up in the same world right now, just because they're bonus little sections, the bonus world maps essentially are all in a certain section of the memory together, and so I have to have them all together in order to be able to properly do that. So there have been some interesting things on that, and in terms of like all the blocks that you see when you're running through the level, which normally you're like, okay, great, level that looks really cool, but to do their compression to try to actually put all that stuff together into the memory and actually have it fit reasonably realistically, some things you basically have 3 pieces to it: the X coordinate, the Y coordinate, and what the item is. Some things, like long blocks, like long chains of, like, let's say, question mark blocks that you hit, instead have 4 values: the X, the Y. This is one of those. This is a chain of those question mark blocks, and how many of those do we put in a row?
Yeah.
So it was something that they added, so that way they could, instead of having to put 15 coin blocks in a row, 15 times 3 being 45. Bytes.
Right, that's a lot.
Now we can represent that in 4 bytes. So it was a good compression thing that they were
good
doing.
For them, yeah.
But in the end, to then have me go through and say, okay, I want to randomize what those item blocks are. Now I have to know which ones are 3s. Yeah. Now I have to know which ones are 4s.
Oh my gosh.
And there's not anything in the game that really says, okay, this is definitely a 3, this is a 4.
Yeah.
Basically, the algorithm just says, okay, just give me the next value, just give me the next value, just give me the next value. Okay, I'm on one of those special blocks. Okay, now give me the 4th, but there's nothing in the code that denotes that. I mean, some of the level editors have, they know what to do because people have gone through and identified that in the past, but I had to go through that and learn that myself in order to do some of that randomizing.
The first game that I ever speedrun was SMB3. It's still one of my favorite games of all time. Definitely loved it as a kid and all that kind of stuff. But Murdoch in the chat, thank you, Fred, for turning off auto-scrolling. How did you figure that out? And what was the thought? Because first of all, thank you. I'm going to thank you as well. But how did you discover that and then think to, turn that thing, whatever it was, turn it off?
Well, that SMB3, a lot of the work I did on that, fortunately, there were some really good level editors out there. So SMB3 Workshop, I believe, was the primary level editor there. And so when I went into some of those levels, like the airships, what I discovered was that there was this little icon that ended up corresponding to auto-scroll stuff. So I basically removed that element. Led to some twists and turns here and there, like the there's a reason that you no longer get the help, the king is transformed, please find the magic wand to change it back, because apparently what happened was you'd go through that cutscene, you go through the next cutscene where you jump onto the ship, and as part of the auto scroller, I think, it would then say, okay, here's Mario, and we're going to give him vertical things, so he's jumping onto the ship at the start.
Oh, right.
When you go directly to that ship without the auto scroller, he starts in that spot where he's going to jump onto the ship. He doesn't have that momentum anymore.
Wow.
So apparently that led to, and the easiest fix I was able to find in the end for trying to do that was I had to lock the airship down at the castle. So that way when you go in, you go directly onto the airship, but now I can't fly around to all those other places. You don't have to chase things anymore, which is probably a good thing.
Those kind of things, doing those type of things in the game engine always have impressed me or surprised me by Nintendo, because nowadays, if something like that, it would be a cutscene, and you might not have to do it in the game engine. You might have to do somewhere else. But the fact that they did it that way made you have to make this choice. I find that stuff super fascinating.
A lot of cool stuff like that, that we pop up on as we're going through things. Like some cases, okay, some of the levels there with the Hammer Brothers. Okay, I want to replace that with such and such thing. Now I go in. Well, apparently there's if you have a vanilla Hammer Brother at the end of like a tank stage or something like that, what it does is it looks for whatever the ID is of the creature that was walking around. So it will replace it with if you got Fire Brother on the top screen, it replaces the Hammer Brother with a Fire Brother. Well, if you got a tank, it doesn't know what to do. You fall into that room and there's no enemy.
No enemy.
And you sit there.
Oh no! Okay, and there's no way to
for the thing to time out. Yeah, basically
no
it's
trigger.
game over.
Yeah.
It's essentially you're locked at that point. You have to wait for the timer to run out, and if it's a tank that's in your way, game over. So had to do things like that to try to prevent those types of deaths. Or when I started randomizing what Koopa kids would appear where as part of swapping the levels around, well, Iggy, I believe, is one of the main ones I think of, tends to jump very, very high. In certain rooms, if he jumps pretty high from one specific block, he jumps up to the top and gets stuck on the top wall and can never fall down. So I had to go in and identify a way to essentially extend those walls vertically upwards, so that way he couldn't ever actually jump over there. Whichever Koopa kid ended up absorbing his stats could never jump up onto that top wall and get stuck. So there are certain things like that pop up in the process of this type of development that you don't even think of, and then all of a sudden you start getting these reports. Hey, Fred, that's locked. Or hey, Fred, those bridges that open and close in World 3? Well, we discovered a case where the way you put some of the locks on the overworld, because I added that in a recent version where it would shuffle the overworld around, shuffle the locks around, so that way you have to figure out, what forts do I have to kill in order to go get to the end. Right. Well, in World 3, with those bridges that open and close, we had a situation where that bridge is in the open position. We have no stages that we can go into to actually be, even to die, to force the bridge to close, and now we can't get to any of the other levels. So I've had to a couple of times put patches out there to say, okay, we're going to take one of those bridges out permanently and replace it with just a straight walking road.
One of the interesting things that I've appreciated you did, and it's probably fairly well known at this point, that you included what are called beta levels or stages that didn't end up in the finalized game. I guess, how did you discover those, or what led you to include that into the randomizer?
Well, part of that one also ended up being that, again, the level editor there had, obviously a list of all the levels that you're looking through. It had the list of the beta levels as well that were there. And so I looked at some of them. I mean, some of them are not fit to play. There's one that's a dungeon thing where basically you go down a pipe. There's one of those giant question mark blocks. You have the Tanuki. You go out the pipe. Level's over. Yeah. I guess I could include that, but no one would really want to see that.
What's the point?
So, exactly. So went through. There were some levels that were, essentially kind of close. There are ones like 1.5. I want to say, the one that you slide down with the Beatles at the beginning. There's a beta version of that's in the code. There's a few other ones like that. There's the infamous stage of Atlantis, which is in the code, which, again, was one of the few levels that really there was nothing like it. There were like the 2 ice levels that were beta levels. There's nothing like them really in the vanilla game. And so I was like, yeah, we got to include these. Some of them were almost finished, but not quite. There was one of those beta levels where the ending platform, there's the black screen at the end that comes down?
Yeah.
Well, apparently the black screen cut off the top block of that ending platform with the way they'd laid it out. Because, again, they didn't finish it. But by cutting off that top block, you run, you get to there, you fall down. You pretty much needed to have a tail, and you had to fly from that platform to get to the block at the end of the level to hit it. Maybe you could have just barely grazed it with a full speed running jump at P speed, but pretty much that one, if you did that, was going to be pixel perfect. So ended up having to fix that level by lowering the floor a little bit to make sure that whatever it wasn't getting cut off. But minor tweaks to some of those levels. The waterfall level where you swim up and there's no enemies in it. At the very end had a pipe at the top that I guess it was pretty easy to do one of those wrong warps, like they do in the 3-minute speed run there. That's pretty easy to accidentally do that when you're trying to jump into it with where it was, so I had to move that down a little bit. So we made some minor adjustments to levels. And then, as we've gone through on that type of stuff, that's pretty much been where a lot of those beta levels came to play. I mean, a bunch of them were still there. I mean, obviously, some of them you can tell are like, okay, this is clearly just a proof of concept, but it's a stage, it's playable, and in some cases some cases are okay, some cases they're fun, so we included them.
And it's a fun way, especially if you weren't aware of them or you've never had a chance to play them, through emulation or some other form of, having access to those levels. So it's kind of cool. It's a really nice addition, actually. Is there, I'm not quite sure. Is there anything you still want to do with the randomizers, or do you find yourself revisiting them, the ones that you've created and worked on?
Yeah, but I mean, obviously certain things I always say to myself, I wonder if I could do. SMB3 is one where I still think there'd be some things that I could potentially do. There's a couple of ideas kicked around in my head. The idea of, Zelda 1, we had the idea of shapes for maps for the dungeons where, do that. Basically, instead of having that fixed layout like it is in SMB3 where the levels are all in specific spots, possibly building one as it goes, building the level on the fly could be something that could be cool. I don't know if I'll actually get to that, but it's definitely one that's kind of on my radar that if I do go back to SMB3, that's one I kind of like to do. Fun way. I know there are people who have wanted, it's going to be a little trickier than we really want, but there's some possibility there. The idea of having a pipe sanity where you go down a pipe in level 1 and end up in World 4. A pipe in World 1 on the overworld go to World 4, which is a cool idea. The problem ends up being trying to store all the cleared levels. So that way you don't go back to World 1 and then all that stuff you have to play through again.
You have to keep track of all that.
Exactly. So there's things like that, but the idea of having something like that and having a essentially almost an open world of how do you get to World 8, how do you get to Bowser's Castle, which things do you actually have to beat to get to Bowser's Castle, and making it a huge giant maze. The idea of that's a cool idea. Implementing that might still be a little tricky, but
that's super interesting. That's super fascinating because the game, when you warp from world to world, it doesn't keep track of your progress if you're in a normal vanilla game. So that's something brand new to the game.
Yeah, essentially, I mean, it keeps track of the world when you're on it, but as soon as you transition one world, I mean, you can even do that in World 7. Not World 7. There's certain World 5. I want to say if you were in World 5, you could play the recorder and warp back to World 5, and all your progress gets wiped out.
It does get wiped. Oh, interesting. Fascinating. Okay.
So, I mean, I know where in memory it's storing all those pieces of what level's been cleared. So it's just more of a case of finding places where I could copy that away and save it and then put it back if I revisit a level. That's kind of one of the major pieces for that to make that work.
What language did you write your randomizers in, and was there a specific reason you perhaps chose that language?
Yeah, typically I've done that with C++ was the main programming language I used to actually make the randomizers, and there were two reasons for that. One, as I mentioned, I did a bunch of that hacking stuff as essentially those programming competitions. That was the language I used, so that was the language I was most comfortable with. And one other thing I knew about that too, especially with Zelda 1, my algorithm isn't exactly fancy. You've seen algorithms in Link to the Past, for example. Link to the Past has 216 item chests. Just picking those up and shuffling them, you have 216 factorial combinations. You're going way past life of the universe. You're not gonna, if you just pick them all up and drop them all down, the odds of getting something that works are really tiny. It's not gonna happen. So they have to essentially come up with an algorithm that places things. I was always scared to do that because that has the potential of introducing bias. Where, because of the way that I'm placing this, it's the reason that in Link to the Past Randomizer, Hype Cave is called Hype Cave because in the early versions, they weighted that location to be more probable to have good items, essentially.
Oh, wow.
And so that's part of the reason that one was known as Hype Cave in the first place. And so I've always been not wanting to have that. So a lot of my algorithms have been literally pick up those puzzle pieces, shuffle them up, put them down, check to see if it works. If it doesn't work, pick them all up again, reshuffle, and try again. So I needed something that would go fast.
Yeah.
So I was looking for something performance-wise, and C++, out of all those languages in the programming competitions, was one of the faster programming languages, just the way that it was more optimized on that side of things. Other programming languages have the ability maybe to be easier to be multi-platform or, JavaScript running in your browser. But as I said, with what I was doing, especially where if you sit there waiting sometimes to generate a second quest type of seed, those things can take a while, especially some of those like spiral dungeons where you have a bunch of old man rooms and a heck of a lot of staircases trying to make sure you can actually get to every single room. It takes a lot of time to process.
I'm glad you highlight that because, as somebody who isn't as understanding, I'm gotten a lot better over the course of the last few years. But when I first played my first randomizer, I think it was an Ocarina of Time one, and I was just like, I just press the button and it should just spit it right out. And no, it takes a second. There actually has to be some work that's being done. It's to your point, it's doing checks, and if those don't work, it's doing it over. So you do have to. It's not. And nowadays, it's really impressive actually. But I mean, there is a moment of processing that actually goes on. So
and in the case of Z1, going back to that one, normally the first quest dungeons would generate pretty fast, within a second or two. Sometimes you'd have to sit for a couple of minutes for the second quest dungeons. It would generate, it wasn't like it wasn't doing things, but it was just got that process. And again, I could probably refactor that algorithm to do something where I place the rooms, which would lead to a faster generation time. But again, part of the thing, at least for me, on trying to do that is, again, that bias of there could be bias popping up. Okay, there's going to be, I know I'm more likely to run into a staircase here. I know I'm more likely to find a certain item in a certain level, maybe because of the way, the generation algorithm's working. I wanted to try to avoid that. Let the chips fall where they are. So that's pretty much the way it's worked out.
I know I didn't try a randomizer until I did speedrunning for a couple of years. If somebody wanted to give this a try, where could they, what's like one of the best places to start? Where can they go to try the Zelda randomizer or the SMB3 randomizer, some of the things you've worked on?
Well, I mean, you can definitely Google them to get the to get the randomizer itself. You can also come to our Discords. The Z1 Discord and the SMB3 Discord for the randomizers are both, great. They have good resources in them. They have access to trackers for the, for SMB3. Yes. A lot of times it can basically be it might be things you might want to track, like maybe like the end spade game, like you're going to try to try to keep track of that because you might want to know, okay, I lost the first round of it, but I know where some of those cards are. So next time when I come back to that, I want to try to remember those. But, a lot of that one is just playing it through. And that one, at least, you can get comfortable just, trying maybe just certain features. And then as you get more comfortable, maybe adding more, like maybe not randomizing the enemies the first couple of times, just so that way you can get used to playing some of those stages in vanilla and then start seeing the evil that comes up when you randomize the second fort in Piranha Land with all those pipes you have to jump through that are now having fire-spitting piranhas instead of just regular plants. But, things like that. So for that one, again, you can do that. Z1, we have a bunch of people around who can also, there's trackers available. I think Emo Tracker has something built in. There's also Z Helper, which is another tracker that's out there that can be used for tracking the game. And then as you start playing through, as you're part of the community, we have channels where we say, okay, help out people. Hey, here, try these seeds. Okay, I'm either running into a problem or, hey, I got a cool seed that maybe people want to play. And you can just copy those and try them out as well.
I know I had, just because it was my first time ever doing it, but when I tried the SMB3 rando, I ran into an issue. I popped up a question. People were very friendly and trying to help me out just because I hadn't really patched ROMs. I hadn't played a bunch of ROM hacks at the time either. So if you hadn't patched a ROM before, there's a whole process of that. But the fact that it works on my NES and everything just kind of like blew my mind again too. Like, this is a totally new game. It's amazing, still just baffled. The technology still just amazes me,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the feeling right there. That was the one thing that, I've always wanted to get through there is that, okay, this is essentially a brand new game that we're playing through again. You know, the Zelda 1 ones, okay, just completely fresh exploration. SMB3, okay, we get to do this brand new thing. Which forts do I go to? What stages do I have to go to? Do I have to go through one of the 2 auto-scrollers that's still stuck in the game because of the way the code is? Well, one is in the game because of the fact that it would break the level the way that the 5.9 is with the diagonal scroll, the way that they left out the data. It's a pain to try to do that one.
Yeah,
Atlantis, I haven't removed the auto scroll on. A, because it's cool. I love that level as a level.
That's
B,
fair.
I also, if I was to remove the auto scroll, it would definitely be cheesable on at least one of the sections, and I've always wanted to at least try to put something in to discourage that. Well, there's a section you come out of the water and go over some ice stuff, jumping over some like munchers, and really, if you didn't have the auto scroller piece in there, you could just swim under that. There's nothing underneath it that would block you, so you could just swim through. And I'm like, if I'm gonna people do that, I want to at least put a blockade in there, so I have to move stuff around there, and I had never really gotten the time to move enough like jellyfish around to really make it hard for someone to be able to swim underneath. So right now they get it as an auto scroller. People grumble about it. It's a fun level to at least play through once or twice, because again, it's almost completely different level than you ever really saw in the regular game there.
And as speedrunners, there's always going to be something that frustrates us. We have to, if we ever solve a game, and there haven't been too many yet, that's what happens. So.
Exactly.
You mentioned you have a family, day job, all these kind of things. Do you find any time to play any modern games or anything? I know most of us are really passionate about the retro stuff, but have you played any modern games? Do you get a chance to enjoy any of those?
I'll do stuff on the Switch. My kids have a Switch, which of course is part of the problem about me wanting to play on the Switch, because, well, they have the Switch. I go upstairs, okay, I just want to get away. No. 3 girls, all of which who are, in the 8 to 12-ish range, so they're all getting into their video
just getting into the gaming
stuff.
Perfect.
Yeah, it's like I walked upstairs today, and it's like, okay, one's on her iPad, the other one's on the Switch, the third one is trying to surf YouTube on the TV. I'm like, okay. We definitely have the full technology gambit going on here. But, in general, that can be a tough thing sometimes. I haven't played a lot of PC games, although I certainly am going to, I think, possibly do that a little bit more at some point here. Do have some of those basic games like Among Us and other games that, they're like, oh, Dad, we want to play Among Us against you. Come on, go sign in to do that. But I haven't done a ton of things. I still actually think I saw Breath of the Wild upstairs, for example, the Switch, still sealed. That I just haven't gotten a chance to get through. Started a little bit of Pokemon Sword, but then of course for the kids to watch, and then all of a sudden they've been like, "Oh no, Dad, we're playing this right now. Sorry, you can't play." Pretty standard stuff. And something, as I said, there's games I'm interested in to a degree. It's just a case of finding that time. Maybe at some point I'll actually have to just cave in and get a second Switch here in the house, that way they don't see it coming. And then if I decide I want to start playing through that, I'll just have to upgrade my capture equipment so that way I can try to play that down here as well.
I'm a little bit fortunate that I've created the profile for my wife to play on the Switch, but she doesn't game very much, so it just sits there. I see Angela's profile there the whole time. I got a little bit lucky that way. One thing I want to thank you for kind of walking through the process of how the Z1 randomizer was created, because I was watching something on YouTube. I can't remember. It was on Nintendo's YouTube channel, and that they had actually used the Z1 overworld to map out a lot of areas in Breath of the Wild. Breath of the Wild, some people love it. Some people, it wasn't for them. I'm in the boat that just really loved it and enjoyed it. And I really find it fascinating that they had used Z1 tools to map out how they wanted to create the world and everything. And I think that really shows you kind of the lasting and the staying power of that game, that, they're still using it today to model things that are happening in games, in 2021. It's kind of amazing.
Oh, absolutely. It's crazy doing that type of stuff. It's nice to see that they actually do, throughout that entire Zelda history, you pretty much have that chronology and the maps, even seeing that, Death Mountain there, and was essentially supposed to be, all that stuff there was supposed to be essentially, for Zelda 2, was essentially just part of the Zelda 1 region, just further north and stuff, so further expanded. So that's always been fun stuff to see, and seeing that type of continuity is fantastic.
Oh, it's really amazing. And I think that all goes back to just the strength of what, what Z1 did, and how it kind of, it just, I don't, revolutionized might be a little bit too strong, but it's just, for me, it was a very impactful game on my youth, and I think on the industry as well. Before I let you go, I'd be remiss to ask, during most of our conversation in the little corner here, I've been showing the your SGDQ 2019 randomizer run, and to tell me a little bit what was it like actually get a chance to play your randomizer on the GDQ stage, and at that time probably in front of 100,000 at least, watching at home and having a packed crowd and everything.
Oh no, that was absolutely a fantastic time there. Getting to race against a Jam there in the race. We've been trying to get it into GDQ for a while there. Finally, we're able to get it in there, be able to showcase it, be able to help raise money for Doctors Without Borders there. That was, again, one of those really awesome things, seeing all that type of stuff, getting to meet. That was the first any of those events I'd ever actually been to in person.
Oh, it was your first one.
Oh, yeah. So getting to meet a heck of a lot of the people. I met a couple of members of the community randomly. Like I'd met Jake Hooper once and like one or two others in the Scavenger. For various work trips I'd had to do in the past, just ended up in their cities and was like, oh, it happened to work out. But hadn't really met most of those people. So that was a great experience to get to meet people like that, get to see this type of community, and again, just seeing all this. I mean, it was touching as an understatement for exactly what it was. Getting to race up there against Jam was fantastic. I was glad we were able to put together a really close race there. Going through, getting into level 9, even pretty much even with each other in terms of that. So it was a great race. Getting to meet, as I said, fantastic people, getting to do stuff for a good cause. It was a win-win for everything involved. It was, as I said, it was a great time. Definitely made me want to try to submit a bit more in the future to other events.
And I'm glad that GDQ has been a little bit more accommodating for randomizers, because there is that it can be tough to schedule it, and I'm sure not knowing not knowing how long that they could take, or if even you could finish it, if there's some sort of thing. And we're seeing more of them, and they've found fun ways. I was curious, were you able to hear the commentary or know what they were saying? Like, was there a way to keep? Because I noticed that you are facing different directions, so I assume they tried to separate you from seeing each other's screen.
Yeah, so again, typically when you're doing a randomizer, you want to be if you're doing a race, you want to be doing blind races where you're not doing anything. So they did tilt the TVs a little bit to try to make it a little bit. I mean, you can still, I guess, technically see a flash maybe on the other screen if someone had picked up a Triforce. But, for the most part, they had the noise-canceling headphones that we had on to try to, so we would get the game audio specifically. Yeah. I think there was at one point early on where I thought I could hear a tiny bit of a little bit of the commentary coming through, like just because, again, it was just that type of room. Yeah. I just found myself humming to the music to specifically try to drown it out a little bit there. Yeah. I mean, obviously you could hear the crowd cheering at a couple of various points there as things were happening. So, as I said, it was a really good experience. As I said, we did our best to try to keep things separate. We did our best to try to keep the aspects of the blind race there. But, at that point, it was a lot more of an exhibition, show off the coolness of everything there and be able to have some good stuff.
Well, it's a ton of fun, and I got to be honest, I was there, and I bummed that I didn't make it into the stream room. As somebody who attended GDQ, you can know you don't spend a ton of time necessarily in the stream room to see some of these things, and I'm bummed I missed that on the schedule. Going back and watching this video because it's great commentary. It's just you can feel the energy, with crowds cheering at the right times and everything. It seems like it was a really fun run.
Oh, absolutely! It was a blast getting to do that. Laws and JSR there on the commentary were great combo. I went back and listened to that. We knew when we were going into that those two were absolutely going to bring the energy to that. It was a ton of fun. It was actually really cool even hearing from my wife about the experience, because she came with me out there. She had never really been to one of these things, and when it was time for everything and people were getting on the couch and the seats behind the couch, I remember Lack actually bringing her over to sit there and was actually coaching her, because again, she's seen me play a little bit, but really didn't, she doesn't do a lot of these like randomizer type of things. And so Lack was there giving her some, okay, awesome. This is what's going on, okay, it looks like this is what's going on, so it was just great seeing how welcoming, that whole community was to be able to like pull together like that.
It's pretty awesome, and it's sometimes tough to articulate how friendly in this whole thing can be. But I'm glad you're bringing those stories up, because those little things are what makes GD great. Like you're not going to have those experiences, without having the live event type of thing. So
exactly, no, it was an absolute blast getting to do that. As I said, it was a great experience, and just seeing how welcoming these communities are, seeing how strong they are, it's phenomenal.
Okay, I do have to mention Link and Cheese, some other folks. I just want to say, good luck. We're all counting on you. Chat loves fcoughlin. I tuned into your stream just a week or two ago, and I noticed you were doing Link to the Past and the Super Metroid randomizer. What keeps you busy on stream nowadays? What are you enjoying playing?
A lot of randomizers lately. There's the ladder races for A Link to the Past, so I've been doing a lot of those. It's basically like a mini league where you get matched up in a one-on-one race against someone at a given time on a certain category, but you don't actually know your opponent until you mark yourself as done. So there'll be like 24 people.
That's a great way to do it.
Pairs of two. Yeah, it's a really cool experience for doing that type of racing. So I've been doing a bunch of that, playing through Zelda 1 as well. At some point soon here, I'm probably going to come back doing some more coding, I think, on stream again. I used to love doing that when I was doing these randomizers, and now that certain projects I've been working on have been finally, starting to taper off a little bit, now I can probably do a little bit more of that. Like I was constantly having the computer running some of those Final Fantasy calculations, like I was mentioning earlier, trying to constantly improve those speed runs. So I'll probably actually step back, do some more of those runs as well too, some vanilla speed runs of that. But yeah, I've been doing some of the combo randomizer there. They've got a co-op tourney coming up on the hard mode, and so Lack Attack and I actually are going to be a team in that tournament. So we've been doing some practice for that. So you'll be seeing a bunch of randomizer play for various things, and hopefully some good times.
If you do find the time to stream some more coding, I really do appreciate that stuff. I wish, once again, that I've tried, coding is just not something that clicks in my brain. I think the way to properly approach it and everything, but I love watching coding streams, and it's just interesting to see. It makes you, first of all, it humanizes you a little bit, because I'm like, okay, these guys, they don't nail it on the first try. There's definitely a process of going through it.
Yeah, no, definitely do not. There have been way too many bugs. Like, okay, walking into a room thinking you're going to see a certain enemy, and the sprites are all garbled because apparently I forgot to mess something up. Like, it is that enemy, but it looks like it's a part gorilla, part dig dogger, but really it's a manhandler or something like that. It definitely happens. So, as I said, it's fun from that perspective. It's something I got to do a little bit more, because I really do want to, again, start getting back into that and doing that on stream. And as and people are absolutely welcome to come in. You don't necessarily have to know about things. I usually try to throw some music on or something just to be in the background. And really, it's a case of, if you've got questions as you're seeing things, ask them, make suggestions, because sometimes some of those things will be, okay, yeah, I've tried that before, we've had the suggestion. Sometimes that might actually work. And next thing you know, that's in one of the next versions of the randomizer. There have been some of those cases with, different features in the randomizer, some of which have just come along from users saying something in chat, hey, it'd be kind of cool to do this. Oh, look, now it's there. Like, I think deceptive hints, originally came along from that, where sometimes the old men tell you the truth, and sometimes they tell you a flat out lie. I think someone has suggested that one in the chat many years ago. And yeah, I was like, okay, that's actually not too bad to do. And now it's in there.
That's that's the fun of it, and I'm thank you, and I'm glad that you might be doing that in the future, because it's a really cool way to just participate and see how it works and everything. So, if people haven't watched yours, where can people find you on the internet? Where would you like, if people wanted to watch some of this, where could they do that?
Yeah, so for me, usually do stuff through my Twitch stream here at twitch.tv/fcoughlin. I do have Twitter, and I think it's actually Fred Coughlin, because someone has the fcoughlin Twitter account. They haven't been active in many years, but of course not. But as I said, just one of those things at this point, I tend to leave it that way. I'm eventually going to start putting some stuff up on YouTube. I just haven't yet had the chance really to get that rolling, but at some point that'll be there as well. But typically, you do that there. Hit me up if you need to see anything on some of the Discords as well.
Well, a huge thank you for myself. Between all of the things you have going on in your life, I really do appreciate you finding a couple hours to talk and share some of this history, because I said it at the beginning, and I want to reiterate. There was this time period in the mid-2000s. Don't get me wrong, the game is still wonderful to watch. I still really enjoy the speedrun. But the competition put that together with the randomizer all happened together, it seemed like Z1 all of a sudden was like the thing. And it's right when I started finding speedrunning, so it just hit at the right time probably. So I've got the nostalgia for it, of course. But I'm so glad that you took, you decided that this idea clicked and you decided to give it a try, because it's really wonderful hearing and learning a lot about this history. It's pretty cool time in speedrunning history, to say the least.
Absolutely. It's just, as you said, it was a great time there, seeing all those battles for not even just, the world records there. I mean, I remember seeing for a while there, we would have some of these race for sub 30 things that would be on Speed Gaming, where, basically they just said, okay, from tonight, from 8 to 12, anyone who's playing Z1, who's within like 2 minutes or whatever, we'll be keeping an eye on everyone. A bunch of people got together to volunteer to commentate. They had a bunch of people volunteer to basically do tracking, where each one would have like 6 streams open and say, okay, fastest CC is in level 5. We might want to make sure he's on stream right now because he's actually got a run going. And basically they would say, okay, go for 4 hours, do whatever you need to do.
Right.
Do that. So like these types of different things that come out of these communities are absolutely awesome.
Totally agree. Murdoch's asking, can we get a son of a monkey for old time's sake? Or is this a simian spawn free stream?
Yeah, I do tend to make my stream PG. I've realized the fact there's a lot of people out there who want to watch this stuff with their kids, and especially I've always grown up, especially with the fact that I've got my 3 girls. I never wanted to be one who would get into this way of saying dropping swears left and right, because then they're going to use it and just start dropping it all over the place, and that's not very cool usually. So I always try to keep my stream pretty clear, but when I do get frustrated, I tend to drop the phrase "son of a monkey" as opposed to certain other types of phrases there. I mean, people have, of course, even started keeping a monkey counter of how often I happen to drop that during each stream.
I'm actually glad Murdoch mentioned that, because I really respect and appreciate folks who can, because sometimes, I mean, I like to use some of these words in real life, and I'm fortunate I don't have kids at home, but you're right. Some people do watch with their kids, which I think is awesome, because there's also a new generation finding these games that, once again, still hold up today. So the fact that they can find your stream and find a family-friendly stream, here's all some of my call-outs. Yes, thank you, Murdoch and Cheese. I remember I have used the F word. I try not to, but sometimes I just let it get the best of me, okay?
Once or twice happens. I mean, occasionally people are going to slip, but, again, the idea is to try to minimize that. And, like, when I watch with my kids, I would have, some of my daughter, like my oldest daughter, sometimes would watch stuff with me, and, sometimes we would hit streams where there might be a Discord call, and so once in a while things would come up, and actually it was a good teaching experience of this is one of those words you don't say, but at least now you know what it is, so that way you're not going to say it. But again, try to minimize that, because we had 4 or 5-year-old at the time. We don't want them; they might not understand what's going on. So, I try to give everyone an environment where they can come in and have a good time, and hopefully not have to hear anything worse than "a son of a monkey" as as the closest thing to a swear.
Well, it's truly appreciated, and the fact that people can watch with their kids, I think that I don't know if you had this experience at GDQ, but I've been impressed by how people actually do bring their kids to the thing, and I think that because the marathon is family friendly in the stream room, and it's something you could feel comfortable bringing your kids to. Now, outside of the stream rooms, we won't, whatever. But
outside the stream room stays outside the stream rooms. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
but
still cool.
I mean, it's definitely something I've considered at some point. If I do get another run in at some point, depending on whether or not it happens to fall in a window where the kids aren't in school, maybe, or something like that, possibly road trip or something out to one of these events, possibly have all of us go out there for it. But I've definitely seen some of those families there with their kids. I'm like, that's good stuff, because again, you're getting to spend some time with your family actually doing something you like.
Absolutely. Well, once again, Fred, I really do appreciate the time, and thank you for this thing you have given to the community. And it continues. I mean, we're watching them right now. There's tournaments going on as we speak, and I'm sure if you search Twitch right now, you will find somebody playing a randomizer somewhere. So thanks again for your time, and thanks for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Definitely appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun here, and look forward to watching this back soon, and we've had a lot of fun today. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for listening, watching, viewing, liking, subscribing, and sharing. All of that stuff goes a long way to helping out the podcast. If you'd like any additional info, you can go to sequencebreakpodcast.com. All of our past episodes, everything's on there. You'll find everything there. If you'd like to watch live, follow the Sequence Break Twitter. That is Sequence Break PC, and you can join in, ask some questions, watch the whole thing live. It does happen. It's not really a set time, but I do post when I go live. Everything else, if you have any questions or anything like that, podcast@sequencebreakpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.